Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Goodrich, the new director of Wayne State's Humanities Center, and it's my pleasure to kick off the inaugural Brown Bag for this year's series. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Theodoto Ressa, who is Disabled Assistant Professor of Disability and Education in the College of Education at Wayne State University. He has a bachelor's and a master's degree in special education and a doctorate in teacher education focusing on inclusive education. Dr. Ressa's background and experiences in Kenya and the US fuel his research interest in higher education institutions and how values, philosophies, missions, visions, and practices impact the lives of persons with disabilities. He also studies the college and career readiness of individuals with disabilities in the US and Kenya. His primary research interests lie in higher education access, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Dr. Ressa's scholarship falls into the transnational education of individuals with disabilities, preschool through college, and interdisciplinary areas of disability studies. His recent publications include Chronocurriculum and the Miseducation of American Disabled Students, Sink or Swim in the Graduate School, Disability and Outdoor Leisure Activities, Review of Schooling of Learners with Disabilities and the Manifestation of the Hidden Curriculum of Time, Time as a Hidden Curriculum, a qualitative study of challenges faced by students with mobility, speech, and visual disabilities in preschool through 12th grade settings, and the COVID-19 pandemic, its consequences, and the recovery. Implementation of disaster education and management is key to the schooling of children with disabilities. So I'd like to welcome Professor Ressa to begin his talk.
So my discussion this afternoon is relatively related to disability culture and the barriers and opportunities in higher education. First of all, I'm interested in higher education for a number of reasons. One is because higher education plays a key role in the way it influences people's culture and how it also is a vehicle by which that culture affects people, especially people with disabilities. Okay, let's see. So as I've just mentioned, the universities are very much influential in society, especially in America. It does play a major role considering the kind of people that it trains, the kind of people that are involved in research, the kind of people that do teaching, and even their scholarship within and outside the universities. And as a result, it has a great influence on how people behave, how people feel, and how people interact and relate with the people with disabilities. I'm very much interested in the whole notion of university as an instrument and a vehicle of empowerment and disempowerment of people with disabilities for a number of reasons. One is because universities through research itself has played a major role in the empowerment of non-disabled people, and therefore perpetuation of certain cultures that have influenced how people with disabilities are seen. But before I go on, I want just to define some terminologies that are so critical for the understanding of my presentation. Now, some of the terminologies that are well popular nowadays within the disability realm is ableism. Ableism simply means preference of non-disabled people over disabled people. Impairment is a both cognitive and physical and psychological limitation in functionality. Disability is relatively defined as a condition of an individual. And disabled people are those who have mental, physical, and psychological limitations, or those who claim to have those kind of limitations, or those who other people attribute them to have those limitations. Now, disabled people here is the opposite of disabled people, those who don't claim to have a disability or are never treated as having a disability. Now, disability identity is relatively a condition where people who have impairment identify themselves as disabled, and they look at it from a positive perspective in that they celebrate their disability as as a quality that need to inform their daily lived experiences and inform how other people relate to them and interact with them. Disability culture, in brief, is simply an appreciation of the way people with disabilities live, the lived experiences of people with disabilities. And I want to go ahead and define this culture, broadly speaking, beyond the confines of belief, attitudes, and all that related things, as culture is people's programs of survival. And therefore, the way people interact and relate to each other is very much informed by culture. And within the disability culture, there is that tendency of them to perpetuate notions and practices and theories that are countercultural to the dominant knowing of disability as an individual deficit. Now, disability in American colleges and universities are very much interesting, especially if we look at the history of American universities from 18th century all the way to the current 21st century. Now, early in the 18th century America, generally disability was relatively restrictive, the way they defined it as anybody who embodied, let me say, apparent disabilities, anybody who you could tell as different, especially from the physical outlook or the way they behaved. And therefore, in the 18th, 19th century, it was not easy to tell the group of disabled people, be they faculty, staff, or students in the universities, but nonetheless, going by the definitions of the then definitions, there was no attributable population of people with disabilities in higher education in America. Today, as a result of the changes in the definitions of disability generally, especially as pertains to the American Disabilities Act or Amendment Act, and other laws related to disability, there is an increased population of disabled people in American universities. Nonetheless, it's very much interesting in this context that there is no known population of disabled people in American universities. Unlike, let's say, P12 schooling level, where you can find statistics of population of students receiving special education, almost 7.1 million children receive special education services at P12 level. Now, that's so interesting for me. Why is it that the population of disabled people in American universities, even the 21st century, is still unknown? Of course, we know that there are many interplaying factors, and these are social, political, economic, cultural factors, and that is so much related to many other factors within the broader realm of social, political, economic, cultural factors. And for example, there are many medical and legal forces that actually contribute to either knowing and unknowing of disability, either people identifying or not identifying with disability. And these socioeconomic, political, cultural factors play a major role on disability identity, disability culture, and the way the perceptions of people with disabilities is created, perpetuated, and in fact, even advanced through scholarship research and other key players and stakeholders in education attitudes. So universities have been in the history of its formation, especially in America. And I'm only stressing in America because, of course, we can trace the history of universities, especially in the 15th century European growth and development. And we can even go further in the Greek times, during the times of Aristotle, Plato, and the rest. But I won't go into that. I'm more interested in American context in this situation. So disabilities has been exclusionary identity, especially in American higher education institutions. And this is well documented as a result of the utopian approach to learning institutions in America. Generally, disability has been the object of study, and people with disabilities have been objects of study, and therefore anything that goes against the norm generally has been a tendency of the universities to employ to exclude people with disabilities. Even today, of course, disability identity itself is still problematic. And of course, that goes back to the whole notion of why is it that we can't tell the population of people with disabilities in American higher education institutions, including Wayne State University. And I'm very much interested in this context for a number of reasons. Is because there is that element of ableism which is acting as a gatekeeping element in higher education. And ableism itself plays within the realm of non-disabled and disabled people alike. And it's because of this interplay of many factors within the disabled community and non-disabled people that makes it very hard for American higher education to play a major role in the advancement of disability identity and disability culture. And I'm very much interested in this situation because American higher education, especially in the 21st century, unlike in the 18th or 19th century, is almost like a double-edged sword in that it, in one way or the other, it's promoting disability rights, but at the same time, it's promoting ableist practices within its settings and other institutions that it influences. So in this talk, as Dr. Goodrich introduced me, I'm a disability studies scholar and also a special education teacher, and also someone who embraces the inclusive education perspectives. And for that reason, definitely my approach is relatively skewed, and when it comes to talking about disability matters in the context that I do feel that the dominant knowledge of disability is so prevalent, and virtually everyone is almost born knowing very well that disability is an individual deficit. And for me, I tend now to gyrate myself from the perspective that I should be engaging in a countercultural approach, by the fact that by doing so, we create plural knowledge and opportunities for others to engage in disabusing each other, and of course, creating a humane society. So I'm using disability studies perspective from the social justice framework to advance the whole notions that disability actually is an identity that should be identified, recognized, appreciated, and celebrated. And disability culture should be part and parcel of the university culture. So I'm coming from that perspective in my argument in this brown bag. Of course, we know very well that there are many opportunities and challenges facing people with disabilities. And of course, those challenges can be grouped virtually in terms of environment, in terms of culture, and in terms of climate. And when we talk about environment, there are physical, social, political, economic environments, and others, of course, that people can identify. But when it comes to physical environment, one of the major challenges that I see as the barriers to inclusion of people with disabilities in higher education is the conflict between college time and crib time as a result of the physical, social, political, economic factors. And I just want to elaborate on this briefly, that the physical environment, especially if you are in an environment that is inaccessible in the context of, let's say, there is limited ramp or bumpy roads, or if you are in a social environment that generally is not appreciative of the disability identity, and when you are in a political environment, and I'm using the political environment here intentionally to define the relationship that people have as a result of the power and the power differences that they embody. So even in a political environment and economic environment, time is a major conflict, and oftentimes people with disabilities are disadvantaged within those environments as a result of the conflict between college time and crib time. And crib time generally here is the what CAFA defines and other scholars have defined as the time by which people with disabilities function. And we can relate that with the controversies, we can relate that with the environment and the aforementioned sub environments that I've just mentioned. The second one is culture. And of course, I've defined the culture as people's programs of survival. And the way non-disabled people have adopted a culture generally in America has been tailored for their own survival. And in this context, culture of deficit has generally grown and has been established and has gained root within the higher education in the context that there is a lot of ideology of ability. And as a result of those ideology of ability, anybody who doesn't fit within the dominant culture is stigmatized, stereotypes, and also become a victim of the myths and myths of disability. And in that context, the deficit culture itself has become a major barrier to inclusion of people with disabilities. And of course, within the ableist practices within higher education, there is also neglect of even the laws that generally are supposed to tame the biases and prejudices and other low expectations that people with disabilities experience. And that feeds back into the whole notion of climate and how a climate itself now becomes a major hindrance to inclusion of people with disabilities. And within the climate, there are many other interplay. And very interesting one is the disabled people multi-identities. Of course, there are other scholars who have argued that disability itself is the scholars like Shakespeare have argued that disability is the master trope of disqualification. So we find that disabled people are the biggest minority group. And although there is a lot of intersectional oppressions that happen within the disability community and other groups, there is a tendency that the disabled people tend to be marginalized within the dominant group and within the minority groups. And of course, this is quite understandable considering the weaponization of disability and how that weaponization has made climate in all realms of human experiences so difficult for the inclusion and belonging of people with disabilities. Now, in summary, I'm very much interested in the social justice aspect of disability. And as I've just mentioned, considering the environmental, the cultural, and the climate issues that people with disabilities experience as a result of their identity, I'm very much interested in social justice approach of disability in dismantling all these environmental and climatic barriers in order to enable environments and opportunities where there is mediation of disability to improve not just disabled people's quality of life, but also for the other non-disabled people. And we know very well from research and practices, especially when you look at the formulation, introduction, and use of other approaches such as universal design, be it universal design of architecture or universal design of teaching and learning, and the differentiated approaches that we employ. We see that anything that is being used to help people with disabilities, in many times, it helps non-disabled much more than disabled people. So I'm I'm very much interested in the social justice aspect of it, that in order to challenge some of the norms that have been perpetuated over the years and still are very much sedimented in higher education, and therefore making higher education to be a double-edged sword that is responsible in advancing disability rights, but at the same time, reducing those opportunities in one way or the other. So that's, I'm interested in the transformation of the individuals and also transform the individuals engaging in practices that help reform colleges and universities to make them friendly, appreciate disability identity and disability culture. Well, I went through that, so that's my conclusion. I went through that just to create an environment for people to engage in discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really a really interesting overview. I'd like to take my director's privilege here to kick off this conversation that we're going to have. I'm interested in how invisible disabilities play into this overall picture that you are sketching. I was really struck by the claim that the disabled are the largest minority population, which that seems totally reasonable to me. But so many people have invisible disabilities. So how does that play into this overall picture that you're sharing?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's great that you are asking that question. And it goes back to the whole notions of the assumptions of who a person with disability is. And probably I should go back to the definition of disability. And I just want, there is no concrete and definitive definition of disability, but I just want to use the American Disabilities Amendment Act, Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act 2008. And in brief, the definition of disability is anybody who has a mental or physical or psychological impairment, or anybody who is treated as having a disability or someone who claims to have a disability. So the definition is so broad in the context that either you have a mental or physical or psychological limitations, or people just assume that you have a disability because of the way you look, and therefore they attribute the disability qualities on you, and therefore they treat you as disabled. Now, people with invisible disabilities is an interesting group in the context that many who come out to claim their disability identity do so for a number of reasons. One, especially at higher education institutions, either as employees or students, they do so that they can get accommodations after many years of suffering in silence. But they somehow tend to be the fewest of the people with invisible disabilities who come out to claim their disability identity. And there are many reasons why that happens is because of the methodologies related with disability. Generally, as I mentioned and quoted Shakespeare, is that disability remains the master trope of disqualification. And coming out or disclosing your disability actually, as much as there is a lot of benefits out of it, also exposes you to a lot of risks. Especially, and that's why, in fact, professors with disabilities who advise those who are going for tenure always say, don't identify your disability identity, because many times it works against you, especially for those who have invisible disabilities. There is just an assumption. One is that the picture people have about people with disabilities is that it should be visible, it should be apparent. So therefore, if you come out as having a disability, yet it's not apparent, many times you will be judged negatively. And when it comes to employees, they tend not to come out and claim that disability identity. But it also works against people with disabilities as a community as a whole, because the structure of higher education, as I mentioned earlier, is very much influenced by many, many elements. One is the economic, political, and the social and the physical structures. And there is, especially just going back to the whole notion of economics, the way universities operate is that nowadays universities tend to be a commercial entities as much as they don't claim to be so. So any budgeting that is done is always influenced by the population of people within that environment. So if there is no significant population, oftentimes those voices are always muted, people are made invisible, and people without apparent disability, if they don't come out, then the university will always be underestimating the population of people with disabilities. Therefore, based on that, it will always be influencing in what areas to invest in and what areas not to invest in. Well, that's just the summary of it. It's a complicated thing that we can discuss, of course, and I would like others to contribute to.
Thank you for that. I think Simone would like to say something.
Well, thank you for that really interesting talk. Picking up on the themes you were already talking about, I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on the impact of COVID in this conversation. So a lot of disability activists have pointed out how COVID's revealed the lack of care that universities take for our disabled community members, students, faculty, staff. At the same time, disability activists are reminding us that COVID is a mass disabling event, and we will be seeing an increasing number of disabled faculty, students, and staff as people recover from COVID with lasting. I wonder, it's early days still, but given that this is your work, if you have any thoughts about where we might find ourselves in this COVID moment, and what tools we might have through disability knowledges to address these issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Chess. That's a very interesting question. Of course, this is not an inconclusive area of study just by the fact that we are still operating within the COVID pandemic. But you are raising a very critical question, and it goes back to the whole notions of disability and causal factors of disability. And especially, as I mentioned earlier, is that universities generally, the way they have been structured is to develop mechanisms of identifying disability and treating those disabilities, and not necessarily incorporating disability within its realm as an area to celebrate, but rather as something to a problem that should be dealt with. But the reality is that the university is a complex, and in fact, like a microcosm of the larger community. There are people with disabilities within that community. And COVID just brought out, first of all, I want to say that it's sad that many millions of people lost their lives as a result of COVID. But at the same time, it has brought out some of the negligences that universities should have addressed for a long time, even before the outbreak of COVID itself. Now, one of the things that has come out as a result of COVID is the failure of the universities always to proactively engage in practices that address issues related with disability. And of course, most of the things that happened, for instance, when it comes to accommodations that many people have benefited from, would have been very easy to adopt had they had people with disabilities in mind long time ago. Most of the accommodations, for instance, I just want to stress on that people have been given, especially those without disabilities, have been the very accommodations that people with disabilities used to claim some time ago. And if universities would have invested in them, actually some of these would have not been an aha moment or something that would have just surprised them. I can take many trajectory to talk about COVID and disability, but I don't know. Yeah, if you have more ideas, you can elaborate on them.
Yeah, no, I think those are great starting points. Thank you. I see another hand.
Unfortunately, I can't see on my hand.
I'm here. Thank you so much for this talk. And I wish every faculty member on campus was forced to watch it, because we're still dealing in an era of so much ignorance around this topic. And it also frustrates the heck out of me that this is yet another area in which higher ed is so far behind what K-12 or P-12 is doing, right? It's just so frustrating because, you know, if you go to most public school districts, they're doing such a good job around inclusion. And, you know, most children today know kids with autism, and they know kids with physical impairments, and they know, and they don't think anything of it because they've been surrounded by it and because of policies of inclusion. And I could talk forever about this, but picking up on what Simone said, I think that actually it's possible that the COVID pandemic has helped us to a certain extent learn to deal the issues around students who have impairments, in that I think it has slowed all of us down. And it took a global pandemic to do that. But I think all of us are now realizing that maybe we were trying to push a little too hard, include a little bit too much material. And now that we have these students who are at the tail end of the pandemic, it's not only the students with documented disabilities who are still struggling, it's mostly all of the students who are still struggling, whether this is like a temporary mental health thing, or whether they've had to take on additional responsibilities because of changes in their family or whatever. But I feel like maybe in general, we are taking a better approach to how we teach our students and how we work with our students on a personal basis, to acknowledge that they are not all stamped out of the same cookie cutter, you know, and that they all have challenges. And yes, a student with a documented disability has even more challenges, but really at Wayne, all of our students have certain challenges, and we're doing better by them if we slow down a little bit and acknowledge that everything doesn't have to be done in warp speed. So it might be good and bad, the whole pandemic thing. Yes, we're likely to end up with more students with disabilities, but will it be more than we've already seen in the increase in the past 15 years? I mean, to Wayne, 1995, there were a couple students on campus in wheelchairs. And there were no students with autism. There were no students who acknowledged ADHD. There were no students who acknowledged mental health, you know, serious mental health issues. Now, here we are almost 30 years later, and it's a whole different ballgame. You know, we have, you know, it's not uncommon to have 10% of your class have some kind of neurodivergence. So we are like that flood of students with disabilities already started, and maybe the pandemic will continue to grow it. I hope so. I really hope so. I hope we're going to continue to get more students with disabilities, because why waste such a large segment of the population? But Theo, I'm going to be seeking you out because I have a million more questions I want to ask you. So, but now I'm going to shut up. Thank you so much.
I do appreciate very much for elaborating on that whole notion. Actually, it goes back to the whole notion of speed, college time, and what other scholars call creep time. And as you mentioned, actually, COVID, despite of its devastating effect, has brought out the whole notion that universities should not just be operating as I mean, like any other organization, there is always that notion that it's not human, but there is need for us to realize that there are humans within that realm, and therefore we should be having humane treatment of each other in one way or the other. Well, I see, now I can see, I see Njahira has raised her hand. I don't know if that was the second person. Yes, please. You have
thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, I guess. Everyone.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Njahera Faith. I'm a doctoral researcher at University of Pretoria at the Center for Human Rights. And I'm focusing on disability rights broadly at this point and health. And my background is in inclusive education, and I'm a disabled person as well. So for me, first of all, Theo, it was really nice to join in. We were in an earlier conversation. I'm Kenyan as well. I'm currently in South Africa. Very many things in there. But I was quite pleased to see, the topic that you're going to be presenting on, because these are conversations that we had about, just inclusion in higher education. And to even just echo what the previous speaker, Jennifer, you were just saying about, just the situation in higher education has completely changed. And I think I want to mention that I have my camera on because it's already past 7 p.m. on this side. So allow me for that. And I think my experience, because I did start my PhD last year amidst COVID as well, my experience to someone who asked about, like what has that done to universities? I feel that on the one side, yes, there's a great growth and impetus towards actually realizing that there are very many of us within academia, and it's really those challenges and barriers that keep us out. But then at the same time, people are like, but I thought you all wanted to work from home, all you disabled people. So nothing is being done in the office settings or at universities to make sure that COVID protocols are still being followed, that those of us who actually do not want to be stuck in social isolation are able to come, onto university campuses and actually interact with our colleagues as well. So like that has really stood out as a big challenge for me. And it's strange to be fighting on this other end for me to actually have an office space and people making it seem as if, oh, we're allowing you to work from home. Shouldn't you be happy? And really, I'm like, no, you should have let me at home in Kenya. So I think there's so many of those realities that are really coming up, and I really appreciated listening to your presentation. Thank you.
And Jaira, it's always great to have you in any forum that I am in. So, but first of all, I just want to echo what you've said, that is very much interesting, especially when it comes to online and physical classroom working spaces. There is an ongoing research. I was just reading another research recently. It's, I think, either incomplete, but they found out, for instance, is that we have what we call appearance bias, and it has been found in some research that the so-called beautiful or handsome people are actually not scoring highly in their courses right now, especially with the online courses in comparison to their previous performances. And that's just one of the research. And it creates a lot of things, especially when it comes to disability, because oftentimes, if you come out as a person with disability, there is always a negative attachment to that. And some of the research have proven that online working spaces and learning spaces actually have enhanced people with disabilities performance, because they are not, some of them who used to suffer from those kind of appearance bias don't suffer from them anymore. And all of a sudden, some of them are becoming very much productive, and people are being judged quite well as a result of that without them knowing the disability condition of those people. But at the same time, as you mentioned, actually it creates another double tragedy for people with disabilities, in that those who have been isolated as a result of COVID, all of a sudden it becomes a doubly a hindrance, in the context that for us who talk about inclusion as a way of bringing people with disabilities visible so that they can counter the normatives of this, the normative practices that has contributed to their discrimination, all of a sudden it's becoming a counterproductive thing. So the question here is, how do we balance all these other elements, considering that visibility of people with disabilities is so critical, but at the same time, we realize that them not being seen from a disabilist perspective actually is now making them challenge the normative ideas or norms or practices So it's a complicated area, which I hope my colleagues will also engage in problematizing. Yes, and I know this is Dr. Monteleone.
Hi, Dr. Ressa. It's so good to see you and to hear your talk today. And I was really struck, by one of the very first things you said about the university is at its core a gatekeeping organization, right? It is built on this idea of gatekeeping. It is built on this idea of exclusion. And of course, it's built on, ableist and racist and sexist ideals. And I was thinking about what disability activist Mia Mingus says about how access shouldn't be about assimilation into non-disabled spaces, but rather like political transformation. And I just wonder if you could speak on, what does it look like, or what could it look like for using the parlance of disability studies, to crip the university, rather than trying to like fit disabled people into these spaces built for non-disabled people? What does the like disability justice version of the university look like?
Interesting question. Well, that's a very interesting and challenging question for a number of reasons, and I will just be brief in my response. One of the things that we realize is that the contradiction of the purpose of universities, and that contradiction still remains up to today. And if we look at the 18th century purpose of the American universities was to engage in the production of knowledge that will lead to the empowerment of people who will engage in the transformation, not of just of themselves, but also the society. And as time has gone by, that kind of purpose has relatively remained, but originally it was very much skewed to the non-disabled people, and of course, not just non-disabled people, but white, male, heterosexual group. And to a certain degree, of course, a lot has changed over time, but those elements still does control the way the university operates, and they tend to be very much invisible forces, which makes it so difficult, actually, sometimes to engage in a counter cultural or counter discourse within the higher education system. Nonetheless, I think the way forward is to creep, as you mentioned, is to creep higher education. And for us to do that, we have to engage in a political consciousness, and that requires not just people with disabilities and their allies coming together to inform the practices of the universities, maybe identify the physical, social, political barriers that affect people with disabilities, but also pointing out the benefits of having people with disabilities. I think one thing that is required is reducing the fear of disability, because that fear is so much, to the extent that at the university level, when you talk about disability, they look at disability from the cost benefit perspective. How much will it cost for us to have computers that have JAWS on them? How much will it cost for us to have accessible van that will ferry virtually everybody from point A to B? How much will it cost in terms of health insurance for professors who are aging as a result of disability? And most of it, actually, they don't look at people who are coming in the university with developmental disabilities, or those who have acquired it as a result of military service or those other related things. So the cost here is always, from the university perspective, skewed against the benefit. And that makes it relatively very difficult for people to engage in positive disability culture, to change the normative culture that we have. But that's an area that probably, yes, I would like for us to engage especially in challenging the university to see that, well, look, the benefit of having people with disabilities, as COVID, and Jennifer, you mentioned it, as COVID has shown, we don't need to behave like ostriches burying their heads in the sand, thinking that, well, if we forget about these things, then probably it will just go away or it is thrown. COVID has shown us that the impact of COVID on people is going to create more disabling conditions, and that's the reality. And as such, the universities as institutions that have been ahead in changing practices should embrace those realities and engage in transforming individuals within its realm and then the broader society into accepting the reality that disability is just an identity. And for us, doing so helps in the long run in creating opportunities that help virtually everyone.
Could I ask just a quick follow-up, if that's okay, if nobody else has a
Sure.
question? So I wonder also about the ways that the sort of legal positioning of disability might interfere with the sort of development of an understanding of disabled identity in higher education. I think, for example, the way that like disability is perceived as like legal risk often on university campuses, and how that might, you know, the way that we've structured our laws might interfere with the sort of production of disability culture in higher ed. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little.
No, that's a tough question. Thank you very much. But that's a tough question because, I mean, for me, from my perspective, I mean, for me, that's a conundrum because for a number of reasons. One, if you look at the disability laws generally, the purpose of these laws, most of them as a result of disability rights movement. And the disability rights movement pointed out some of the hindrances to their emancipation, their empowerment. And these laws actually was a response, to those movements. But at the same time, now the contradictory part of these laws is that those laws, always people in authority always embrace certain laws so that they can tame full revolution generally. So that's the purpose. So we are giving you these rights, but within this realm. So it's a complex thing. I don't know how to advance it, but it's a complex thing in that in one way or the other, those laws are very important in that they are the starting point for disability awareness, or of course saying, well, this is the lowest threshold of disability rights that institutions, organizations must fulfill. But on the other side is that people are driven by those thresholds. Actually, the lowest threshold, that's what everyone aims to operate from. Once they have achieved that, nothing else, they have checked the boxes. Well, does the building has elevator? Yes. Do we have a well-informed professor who can address disability issues? Yes. So once they have achieved that, they don't look at the bigger picture. So I don't know. Yeah, that's an area that needs problematized for sure.
Well, it's 1:29, so I think we've hit up against our limit here, but I want to thank Professor Rissa for starting us off with such a wonderful talk with so much substance and importance for our university, but also for higher education. So thank you so much.
I do appreciate very much, and I really am very happy that you managed to find the time to join me. And the questions have been very much informative. And I think this is not just the starting point, but this should be a continuous area of discussion so that, as other colleagues have mentioned, we need to be the light in higher education to help transform higher education into the one that really is pro other humanity in the world, in the United States and in the world.
Well, thank you so much. I know we'll all look forward to continuing that conversation with you. And thanks to everyone for attending.
Thank you very much. Yes.